At 60, Yoon Ha-yeon had learned the exact weight of silence. Silence was what you used to drag a scandal out of the headlines, to make a whistleblower suddenly transfer abroad, to turn a board member's screaming rage into a polite resignation letter. Silence was what you used to survive, when you were the woman executives called at 2 a.m. and pretended not to recognize at 9 a.m. She was a corporate fixer, a ghost with receipts, and she had been one for so long that even her own reflection looked tired of the role. Then, one night, her body betrayed every rule it had ever followed. She went to sleep with aching knees and the slow burn of old grief in her chest, and she woke up with her heart punching like a drum, her skin too tight, her breath too fast, her hands smooth and unfamiliar. The bedside clock glowed 5:11, and when she sat up, the movement was sharp, effortless, wrong. She stumbled to the mirror expecting to see the same face that had aged in private and smiled in public like a weapon. Instead, she saw a woman who could have been her daughter, if she'd ever had the luxury of motherhood. 27. The age that still lived like a splinter under her ribs. The age she'd been when she'd lost everything the first time. She tore through drawers, through her wallet, through the documents she kept obsessively sorted because a fixer survived by never being surprised. Retirement ID, health insurance, a phone stuffed with burner numbers and encrypted contacts. Her name was still Yoon Ha-yeon on the oldest records, but on the newest it was a neat alias that had protected her for years. Yet her fingers kept shaking, because the mirror didn't care about aliases. She opened her laptop, breathless, and typed her legal name into a news archive she paid to access. The screen loaded slowly, as if savoring her fear, then offered a headline from yesterday. Yoon Ha-yeon, 60, found dead after accident. A small photo. Her photo. Her older face, eyes half closed like she'd finally allowed herself to rest. Beneath it, a line that made her stomach drop, funeral private. No attendees listed. Case closed. Case closed meant somebody wanted it closed. Somebody wanted her dead in the only way that mattered in corporate war, on paper. Ha-yeon pressed a hand to her throat and forced herself to breathe. This was not a miracle. Miracles didn't come with paperwork. This was a move on a board she'd once believed she understood better than anyone. She looked down at her hands again, the hands of her 27-year-old self, and a bitter, almost laughable thought slid through her mind. If they'd erased her at 60, maybe the only way to fight back was to become the version of herself the world couldn't file away so easily. By noon she was standing in a glass lobby that smelled like money and cold air, staring up at the corporate tower she had helped build with her own blood and buried secrets. Hanseong Group. Even the name felt like a bruise. 33 years ago, she'd walked into this building wearing an engagement ring and a naive belief that love could survive power. She'd walked out with nothing but a shattered reputation, a broken promise, and a lesson she'd spent decades teaching herself: men in suits didn't ruin you with anger, they ruined you with signatures. Now she stepped inside again, wearing a simple blazer and an employee badge she'd forged in 3 hours because she knew every weak link in the company's security chain. Her new name on the badge was harmless, forgettable, the kind of name a young assistant might have. She kept her head down, her posture humble, her expression carefully empty. At 60 she'd learned that being underestimated was its own kind of armor. At 27 she had the face that made underestimation automatic. She rode the elevator up with a handful of employees who stared at their phones, unaware their livelihoods were being traded like poker chips. A hostile takeover rumor had been circulating for weeks. She'd heard it through the fixer network that fed her information like oxygen. Board members whispering, shareholders nervous, a rival fund circling like a shark. Hanseong was bleeding, and if someone had declared her dead yesterday, it meant the takeover wasn't just financial. It was personal. On the executive floor she found the boardroom door half open and the murmur of voices sharp enough to cut. She wasn't supposed to be there. That was the point. She slipped in with a tray of documents and a practiced expression of obedience, moving along the wall like a shadow. 12 men and women in expensive suits sat around a table that could have hosted a small wedding. At the head of it sat Kang Jun SEO. CEO. The man who had once been her fiancé. The man whose name still lived in her like a fever she refused to admit she'd ever had. Time hadn't softened him. If anything, it had sharpened him into something colder, more precise. His hair was neatly combed, a faint streak of silver at the temple, his jaw set like a decision that would never be reversed. He listened to a director speak, then lifted his gaze and the room seemed to quiet around it. That gaze moved, scanning, dismissing, and then, without warning, locked onto her. Hyen felt it like a physical hit. Her lungs forgot how to work. She lowered her eyes, pretending to focus on the papers, but she could feel the weight of his stare refusing to let her go. The director kept talking. Someone mentioned shareholder confidence and asset restructuring. None of it mattered, because the only sound Hyen could hear was the sudden, dangerous silence inside her own head. She'd changed everything she could change. Her name, her hair, her posture, even the way she walked. But she couldn't change her eyes. Juneseo's hand tightened around a pen. It snapped cleanly in half, a small, violent sound in a room full of controlled voices. Several board members blinked at him. He didn't apologize. His eyes never left her. "Who is she?" he asked, and the question sliced through the meeting like a blade. A senior director frowned. "She's new. Temporary support from compliance." Juneseo stood. The movement made every other person sit straighter. He took 2 steps, then 3, and stopped close enough that Hyen could smell the faint clean scent of his cologne, the same one he used to wear when he'd lean in to whisper promises he didn't keep. His voice dropped low, meant only for her. "That look," he said, as if speaking to a memory. "Only one person ever looked at me like that." Hyen's throat locked. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, I think you're mistaken." Juneseo's gaze sharpened until it felt like he could peel her skin away with it. Then he said the one word no one else in the building would ever say. A private nickname, soft and humiliatingly tender, the name he'd given her in the days before everything burned. Her knees threatened to buckle. The room swam for half a second, and she realized with icy clarity that if he truly recognized her, then the people who wanted her dead on paper could recognize her too. Juneseo turned back to the table as if nothing had happened. "Take 5 minutes," he said, voice calm again, CEO smooth. "I want the room cleared." The directors protested, confused, but power made people obedient. One by one they stood and filed out, murmuring. Hyen tried to move with them, but Juneseo's hand shot out and closed around her wrist. His grip was firm, not cruel, but it burned like a brand. When the door shut, the boardroom suddenly felt too quiet, too large, too full of ghosts. He didn't let go. "Tell me," he said, his voice stripped of all corporate polish, "how a dead woman walks into my boardroom." Hyen swallowed the truth and replaced it with a lie she could live with. "I'm not who you think." Juneseo released her wrists slowly, as if testing whether she would disappear. "Then explain this," he said, and pulled a thin folder from beneath the head seat. It was sealed with black tape, the kind used for evidence, the kind meant to scream, "This is official, this is final." On the front was a label printed in cold, neat letters. Yoon Hyen, death certificate. Issued, yesterday. Hyen's blood ran colder than the glass walls around them. She looked up, and Juneseo's eyes were no longer just shocked. They were furious. And underneath the fury was something that scared her more than anger ever could, relief, sharp and unwanted, like he'd been starving and someone had offered him water. "I didn't do that," he said, as if anticipating her accusation, as if hearing it in her silence. "But someone did. And if they can kill you on paper, they can kill you for real." He slid the folder toward her, then added one more item, an internal security printout, fresh ink still smelling like heat. A photo from the lobby camera, timestamped this morning. Her face. Her 27-year-old face. A red circle drawn around it, like a target. Hyen's hands hovered over the evidence, trembling despite herself. She had walked into the lion's den to find leverage, and instead she'd found proof that the hunt had already started. Junesio's voice dropped into something dangerously intimate. "If you are her," he said, "then you and I have unfinished business. And we don't have time." Because at that exact moment, Hyen's phone vibrated in her pocket with a message from an unknown number, one line that made her vision narrow to a pinpoint. "Welcome back, Hyen. This time, we'll bury you properly." Hyen had spent decades training herself not to flinch, but the message hit her with the kind of fear she hadn't tasted since she was 27 the first time. She forced her face into stillness, then slid the phone back into her pocket without letting Junesio see her panic. A fixer survived by controlling the room, and right now the room was a glass box on the top floor, with her ex-fiancé holding her past like a knife. Junesio watched her for a long beat, reading the micro-expressions she couldn't fully erase. "Someone contacted you," he said quietly. "It's nothing," she lied, and hated herself for how easily the old habit returned. "Hide the wound, keep walking, don't let anyone see where you bleed." Junesio's jaw tightened, but instead of pressing, he leaned back against the table and let the silence stretch until it was unbearable. "Hanseong is under attack," he said finally. Not a rumor. Not a headline. A coordinated takeover. Someone is buying blocks of shares through shell accounts, pressuring our lenders, planting stories about fraud. He tapped the sealed death certificate folder with one finger. And now this. That means the attack isn't just on the company. It's on the people who know where the bodies are buried. Hyen almost laughed at the bitter accuracy. She knew where the bodies were buried because she'd helped bury them. For years she'd cleaned up other people's crimes, telling herself it was survival, telling herself she was preventing worse damage, telling herself she was building enough leverage to someday buy back her own freedom. Somewhere along the way, survival had turned into a cage. Now, in a young body, she felt the cage door crack open, and she wasn't sure if she was stepping out or being shoved. "What do you want from me?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral, corporate. Junesio's eyes flickered, as if the question wasn't about business for him. "I want the truth," he said. Then, softer, more dangerous, "and I want you alive." He exhaled and forced himself back into CEO mode. "If you are Hyen, then you have what I need, your mind. Your instincts. Your ability to see the hidden structure behind the numbers." His gaze sharpened. "Help me stop the takeover. In return, I'll protect your identity until you decide what you want to do with whatever this is." Whatever this is. The words made Hyen's skin prickle. She didn't trust him. Not fully. Love and betrayal had once worn the same face for her. But she trusted the math of survival, and right now the math was simple. Alone, she would be erased. With him, she might last long enough to strike back. "Fine," she said. "But I'm not doing this for you." Junesio's mouth curved faintly, almost a smile, almost grief. "Of course not," he murmured, and in that moment Hyen hated the warmth that tried to rise in her chest, because it felt like weakness. He moved quickly after that, clearing a small conference room near his office and assigning her an anonymous workstation under the pretense of a special project. He placed one person between her and the rest of the executive floor, Chaunmi, his longtime executive assistant, a woman with sharp eyes and a polite smile that didn't hide her intelligence. Eunmi gave Hyen a glance that lingered half a second too long, as if she felt something familiar but couldn't name it. Hyen kept her posture small, her voice soft, playing the role of the young temporary worker while her mind ran like a machine. The first thing she did was pull transaction data on share movements. The second was track the shell companies making purchases. The pattern was elegant, and that terrified her, because elegance meant someone experienced was running the operation. Within hours she found the signature, small purchases distributed through dozens of accounts, each one linked to a consulting firm that didn't exist 6 months ago. A hostile takeover wasn't a storm, it was a clock, and somebody had started it ticking before anyone noticed. She walked into Junesio's office after midnight with a stack of printed charts because some truths landed harder on paper. He was alone, jacket off, tie loosened, the kind of exhaustion only power could create. When he looked up at her, the mask slipped for half a second and she saw the man he had been before the CEO title made him heavy. It was the man she'd loved. The sight hurt more than she expected. "They're using proxy accounts tied to a fund in Singapore," she said, spreading the charts on his desk. "But the real control sits here." She tapped a small node on the network map. "A Korean shell consulting group that keeps appearing in every structure. It's being run by someone who knows Han Seong's internal weaknesses." Jun Seo's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Hyun hesitated, then said the name that tasted like poison. "Seo Min-kyun." For the first time, Jun Seo's composure cracked. Min-kyun was a rising executive star, a board favorite, someone the press loved to call a visionary. She was also, Hyun knew, the kind of woman who smiled while she sharpened the knife. Years ago, Min-kyun had been a junior strategist with hungry eyes. Today she was powerful enough to buy wars. Jun Seo stared at the network map as if it could bite him. "She wouldn't move alone," he said. "No," Hyun agreed. "She has outside money. And she has inside access." She let the implication hang between them like smoke. Inside access meant someone on the board. Someone in his trusted circle. Someone who could issue a death certificate and make it look legitimate. Jun Seo's gaze lifted to her. "You think the board is compromised?" "I think you're surrounded," Hyun said quietly. "And I think I'm not the only person who's been erased." He leaned back, eyes closing for a second, as if the weight of the truth was physically painful. When he opened them again, he looked at her like she was both a weapon and a wound. "Why did you disappear?" he asked, the question suddenly raw. "Back then. You vanished and everyone said you," he swallowed the word dead, like he couldn't stand to give it voice twice in one day. Hyun's throat tightened. She had promised herself she wouldn't fall into the past, because nostalgia was another kind of trap. But the question cracked open a door she'd kept sealed for decades. "Because someone made sure I had no choice," she said. "Because the company needed a scapegoat, and you let them use me." Jun Seo went still. "I didn't," he said, voice low. "I tried." "Don't," Hyun cut in, sharper than she meant. "If you tried, it didn't matter. The outcome was the same." Silence filled the space between them, heavy with everything they'd never said. Jun Seo's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk, then he forced himself back to business, because business was safer than regret. "Min-kyun is hosting the Founders Gala tomorrow," he said. "Media will be there. Investors. Board members. If she's orchestrating this, she'll make a move." He looked at Hyun. "You're coming." Hyun's pulse spiked. A gala meant cameras, faces, the kind of public stage where secrets died screaming. "I can't," she said. "You have to," Jun Seo replied, and there was something almost pleading beneath the command. "If she recognizes you, we learn how deep this goes." Hyun stared at him, and for a moment the old intimacy tried to crawl back into the space between them. It would have been so easy to believe he was protecting her because he still cared, because love survived betrayal, because stories were kind. But she'd lived long enough to know stories were rarely kind. "Still," she nodded, because the alternative was waiting to be buried properly. Before she left his office, Eunmi appeared in the doorway with a quiet knock, holding a small envelope. "Sir," she said, eyes careful, "this was delivered for your special project staff member." Her gaze slid to Hyun. "No return address." Hyun's stomach tightened as she took it. Inside was a single keycard and a note written in neat handwriting. "Level B3. Archive room. Midnight. Come alone if you want to know why you're 27. She looked up at Jun Seo, and the words stuck in her throat. This wasn't just corporate war anymore. This was a trap built specifically for her. Jun Seo's eyes hardened as he read the note over her shoulder. "You're not going alone," he said. Hyen shook her head. If they want me, bringing you makes it worse. Junaseo's voice dropped, fierce. If they want you, you're already in danger. I'm not letting you disappear again. In that moment, something inside Hyen twisted, anger, longing, fear, all tangled together. She wanted to push him away and pull him close at the same time, and she hated that her 27-year-old body made her feelings feel louder. She slipped the keycard into her pocket. Then don't stop me, she said, and walked out before she could change her mind. And if you're already hooked into this second chance corporate romance mystery, tap like and subscribe now, because what she finds in that basement archive is the kind of secret that changes everything. The gala glittered the way a knife glittered, beautiful, sharp, and designed to cut whoever got too close. Crystal lights hung like frozen stars. Cameras flashed. Investors laughed too loudly, as if noise could keep fear away. Hyen moved through the crowd in a black dress that made her look like every other young professional woman in the room, except her eyes kept scanning exits and reflections the way only a survivor's eyes did. Junaseo stayed near her without hovering, the perfect corporate partner, but his gaze kept returning to her face as if he was afraid the world might blink and she'd be gone. Minkyun arrived like she owned the air. She wore white, of course, pure, expensive, untouchable. When she stepped onto the platform to give her speech about integrity and innovation, Hyen felt something cold settle into her stomach. The worst predators always spoke like saints. Hyen watched the way Minkyun's eyes moved through the crowd, calculating, measuring, and she knew, with the sick certainty of experience, that those eyes were searching for one thing. A familiar face. Junaseo leaned in, voice low. If she looks at you too long, turn away, he murmured. Don't give her time. Hyen almost laughed. You think she needs time? She whispered back. People like her only need 1 second. Minkyun's speech ended in applause, and the room softened into networking chaos. Hyen used the movement to slip toward the staff corridor where she could breathe. Her phone buzzed with an unknown call. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. Unknown. Again. Each vibration felt like a finger tapping on her spine. She pushed open a side door and froze. Minkyun stood in the hallway alone, as if she'd been waiting there the entire time. The overhead lights cast a clean glow, but Minkyun's smile was shadowed. Her gaze dropped to Hyen's face with a lazy confidence that made Hyen's skin crawl. So, Minkyun said softly, the dead really do come back. Hyen forced her expression into confusion. I think you have me mistaken. Minkyun stepped closer, close enough that Hyen could see the fine detail of her makeup, the careful perfection. Don't insult me, she said, voice still gentle. I remember eyes. I remember the way you looked at me when you realized what I'd done. Her smile widened. You should be proud, Hyen. Most people don't get a second life. You did. The hallway felt suddenly too narrow, the air too thin. Hyen's mind raced through options, run, scream, deny, attack, but Minkyun's calm made every option feel like a losing move. What do you want? Hyen managed, voice steady only because she'd trained herself for crises like this. Minkyun lifted a finger and tapped lightly against Hyen's collarbone, a mockingly intimate gesture. What I've always wanted, she said. Hanseong. Control. And your silence. Her eyes glittered. But silence is tricky. Dead people are so cooperative. Living people, not as much. Hyen's blood chilled. You faked my death, she said, keeping her voice low. Why? Minkyun's smile didn't move. Because the board believes paperwork more than truth, she replied. And because you were becoming inconvenient. She tilted her head, studying Hyen like a specimen. I didn't expect the cosmetic change. But I like it. It makes the story more dramatic. Hyen's nails dug into her palm. What did you do to me? Minkyun's gaze flicked to the side as footsteps approached. The hallway door behind Haiyan opened slightly, someone passing by. Minkyun's expression shifted instantly into harmless politeness, and for a heartbeat Haiyan saw the full scope of her skill. This woman could switch faces like masks. When the footsteps faded, Minkyun leaned close again, voice a whisper. "Midnight," she murmured. "B3. Archive room. Come. Or I'll tell the CEO what you really are." Haiyan's mouth went dry. "He already knows," she said, bluffing. Minkyun laughed softly. "Does he?" Then she brushed past Haiyan as if they'd merely shared a friendly greeting and disappeared back into the glittering crowd. Haiyan stood frozen for a second, fighting the urge to collapse. Then she turned and nearly collided with Jun Seo. His eyes were sharp, suspicious. "What did she say to you?" he demanded. Haiyan forced herself to breathe. "She knows," she said. "And she's leading me to the archive." Jun Seo's face tightened. "Then it's a trap." "It's also a lead," Haiyan said, voice hard. "And I'm tired of being hunted." At 11:58 p.m., they stood at the service elevator that led to basement level B3. Jun Seo had security. Haiyan refused it. Eunmi tried to argue, her eyes anxious, but Haiyan could only shake her head. Too many people meant too many leaks. Too many witnesses meant the wrong witness. In corporate war, secrecy was oxygen. The elevator doors opened onto a concrete corridor that smelled like dust and old air. The archive floor was silent, lined with locked rooms and filing cabinets that held decades of secrets, contracts, audits, sealed settlements, the kind of history that could bankrupt companies and destroy families. The keycard slid into the reader with a soft beep. The archive room door clicked open. Inside, the lights were already on. A table sat in the center with a single folder on it, thicker than the death certificate file, stamped with a project code, rewind. Haiyan felt her pulse spike. Jun Seo moved in front of her instinctively, protective without meaning to. On the far wall, a monitor flickered to life by itself. Security footage. Live feed. It showed the hallway outside the archive room. And then the speakers crackled, and Minkyun's voice poured out smooth as honey. "Good," she said. "You came." Haiyan's stomach dropped. "Where are you?" she called, voice echoing off concrete. The live feed shifted to another camera angle, and Haiyan's breath caught. The video showed a small medical room somewhere else, white walls, stainless tools, a chair bolted to the floor. And strapped to that chair was an older man, face bruised, eyes wide with terror. A doctor. Haiyan recognized him from a memory she tried to bury, Dr. Park, the company-linked physician who'd signed her mental fitness evaluation right before she was framed decades ago. Minkyun's voice purred. "You always wanted answers, Haiyan. Here's your witness." Jun Seo's face went pale with rage. "You're kidnapping people now?" he snapped at the speaker. Minkyun laughed softly. "Kidnapping is such an ugly word. Think of it as asset management." Her voice sharpened. "Open the rewind file." Haiyan's hands trembled as she reached for it. The folder was filled with research summaries, clinical trial notes, donor lists, and at the center, one page that made her vision blur, Subject age regression trial. Status, successful. Outcome, identity reassignment required. Identity reassignment. The phrase punched a hole through her chest. "You did this to me," she whispered, voice breaking despite her control. Minkyun's voice turned almost affectionate. "Not to you," she corrected. "For you. You were perfect, Haiyan. A woman with no family, no public support, already erased once. The ideal subject. You should be grateful." Jun Seo stepped forward, trembling with fury. "End this," he said. "Now." Minkyun ignored him. "Dr. Park is going to tell you what you want to know," she said. "Or he's going to stop breathing. Your choice." Hyun's heart hammered so hard it hurt. She stared at the monitor, at the terrified doctor, at the cold precision of Min-kyun's cruelty. Then Dr. Park's lips moved, voice weak but audible through the speakers. "It wasn't just your age," he rasped. She needed your identity too." Hyun's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" The doctor swallowed, eyes darting as if he could see Min-kyun just off camera. "She sold it," he whispered. "She sold your life. There's another woman, using your name, your retirement accounts, your death record, everything." His voice cracked. "And tonight, she signed the takeover deal." Hyun's blood turned to ice. If someone else was living as Yoon Hyun, then her second life wasn't freedom. It was a trap with a replacement. She looked at Jun Seo, and his face was stunned, as if the truth had just punched him too. Then the archive room door slammed shut behind them with a heavy metallic clang. The lock clicked. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging them into darkness, with only the monitor's glow painting their faces like ghosts. And in that blackness, Hyun heard a soft sound from the corner of the room, someone else breathing. Hyun didn't scream. She'd screamed once, 33 years ago, when the world collapsed around her and nobody came. She'd learned since then that fear was a currency you spent carefully. In the dark archive room, she let her body go still while her mind moved fast, counting space, exits, the angle of the table, the distance to Jun Seo's shoulder. The monitor's glow was weak, but it was enough to reveal a silhouette in the corner, someone standing perfectly motionless, as if waiting for permission to exist. Jun Seo shifted beside her, a quiet protective movement. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice low, dangerous. The silhouette stepped forward into the monitor light, and Hyun's breath caught in her throat so sharply it hurt. It was a woman. Older. Late 50s, maybe 60. Hair neatly styled. Clothes expensive in the quiet way wealth always was. Her face, her older face, looked back at Hyun with a calm that felt inhuman. For a second, Hyun's mind refused the image. It couldn't be. She was the only Hyun. She had lived every year, every scar, every loss. And yet the woman standing there wore her age like a stolen coat. The older woman smiled gently, almost sympathetically. "You look better than I expected," she said. Her voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone who had rehearsed lying in front of mirrors. 27 suits you." Hyun's entire body went cold. "Who are you?" she whispered. The woman tilted her head. "I'm you," she said, and the cruelty of the statement landed like a slap. "At least, I'm the version the world has accepted. The version with the legal name. The accounts. The shares. The death record." Her smile sharpened. "And I'm here to make sure you stay dead where it matters." Jun Seo stepped forward, fury exploding through his composure. "You're the imposter," he spat. "You're the one who signed the takeover." The woman's gaze slid to him, and something flickered there, interest, disdain, maybe even jealousy. "CEO Kong," she said smoothly. "I've met you. Briefly. You didn't look at me the way you're looking at her." She smiled again, softer. "It must be the eyes." Hyun's chest tightened with nausea. She wanted to attack, to rip the stolen life off this woman's bones, but she forced herself to stay still, because this wasn't a fight of fists. It was a fight of evidence. "Min-kyun bought you," Hyun said, voice steady. "She bought my identity and dressed you in it." The woman shrugged lightly. "She offered me a choice," she said. "Be nobody forever, or become somebody with a clean story. I chose survival." Her gaze sharpened. "You, of all people, should understand that." Hyun's hands curled into fists. "Survival doesn't require theft." "Doesn't it?" the woman countered, and Hyun flinched because the question hit too close. Fixers survived on other people's sins. She had told herself she was different, that she was controlling chaos, but the older woman's calm cruelty held up a mirror Hyun didn't want to look into. The monitor crackled again, and Minkyun's voice returned, amused. "Aren't reunions lovely?" she purred. "Now, here's the deal. I have the takeover votes. I have the press ready. I have your company's lenders on a leash. And I have a story the public will swallow, a young con artist impersonating the late Yoon Hyun to seduce the CEO and steal assets." She laughed softly. "Age regression? That sounds like insanity. A scam. A delusion. You'll be the crazy girl. He'll be the foolish CEO. The board will eat it up." Juneseo's fists clenched. "You think you can win with a narrative?" he snapped. Minkyun's voice turned sharper. "Narratives are everything. Proof is just a supporting actor." Hyun inhaled slowly, and something in her settled. This was the moment fixers were made for. Not panic. Not despair. Leverage. "You're wrong," she said softly into the darkness, speaking to the speaker, to Minkyun, to the boardroom waiting upstairs. "Proof is the only thing that survives when people get tired of stories." Juneseo looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the old recognition again, not of her face, but of her mind. The mind he'd once trusted with his future. Hyun stepped toward the table and pulled out a flash drive she'd kept hidden since her first hour back in the building. At 60, she'd learned to prepare a trap before she walked into a room. At 27, she now had the speed to spring it. "Eunmi," she said quietly, pressing a button on her phone. A crackle answered. Eunmi's voice, tense but steady, came through. "I'm here." Hyun had told Eunmi almost nothing, only enough to make her loyal curiosity burn. She'd known Eunmi would follow instructions because Eunmi loved Juneseo, and because Eunmi was smarter than the men who assumed assistants were invisible. "Start the board livestream," Hyun said. "Now." Juneseo's eyes widened. "You arranged." "I arranged an insurance policy," Hyun cut in. "Because I don't trust miracles." The older imposter's calm wavered for the first time. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Hyun plugged the flash drive into the archive monitor's hidden port. The screen flickered, then switched from the basement feed to a live broadcast of the boardroom upstairs. The directors had returned, confused, irritated, waiting for their CEO to resume the meeting. On the wall behind them, the large screen lit up, showing Hyun's face in stark clarity. Her young face. Juneseo's face beside hers. The imposter's older face in the corner, caught by the monitor's glow like a confession. Gasps erupted upstairs. Voices overlapped. Someone shouted Juneseo's name. Minkyun's voice sharpened, suddenly less amused. "Turn it off." Hyun leaned toward the camera. Her voice stayed calm, because calm was power. "Directors," she said. "You're about to hear a recording from Project Rewind. It includes clinical trial logs, payment transfers, and a signed authorization from Executive Director Seo Minkyun." She paused just long enough for the words to land. "You're also going to see why a death certificate was issued yesterday for a woman who is not dead." In the boardroom, faces paled. One director stood abruptly, shouting to cut the feed. But Eunmi had routed the stream to multiple devices, investor phones, internal screens, even the press room feed Minkyun had prepared. Hyun knew this because she'd taught people how to spread information when suppression was inevitable. The audio began to play, Dr. Park's voice from the earlier feed, shaky and terrified, confessing the essentials, the trial, the identity reassignment, the payments, Minkyun's orders. Hyun didn't add dramatic commentary. She didn't need to. Corporate lies died quickest when numbers and signatures were read aloud. Then Hyun pulled out the sealed death certificate folder and held it up to the camera. "Issued yesterday," she said. "Signed by an internal registrar whose access was granted by Hanseong's Executive Strategy Office." She looked directly into the lens. Minqian didn't just attempt a hostile takeover. She attempted an erasure. Upstairs, the room erupted. Some directors shouted for security. Others shouted at each other. Junessio stepped into frame, voice like steel. "Freeze all share transfers effective immediately," he ordered. "Launch an emergency audit. Notify regulators. And detain Executive Director Seo Minqian for questioning." Minqian's voice screamed through the speakers now, the mask finally cracking. "You think this is enough?" she snarled. "You think anyone will believe she's Haiyan? She's a girl. She's nothing." Haiyan's eyes burned, but her voice stayed low. "I've been nothing before," she said. "It didn't stop me." The imposter backed away toward the door, panic finally showing. "I didn't know she would do this," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. "I thought it was paperwork. I thought." "Get out," Haiyan said, not because she forgave her, but because the bigger enemy was Minqian and the war wasn't over yet. The imposter fumbled with the door panel, but it stayed locked. Minqian had sealed them in as part of the performance. And then, as if the building itself had decided it was done with secrets, the archive door unlocked with a loud click. Security sirens wailed faintly in the distance, upstairs finally reacting. Eunmi's voice crackled again. "They're moving on Minqian," she said. "Press is outside. Regulators are being notified." Haiyan's knees threatened to weaken from the sudden shift. After decades of being a ghost, she just set fire to a room full of powerful liars. Junessio turned to her, and for a moment there was no CEO, no fixer, no corporate war, only two people staring at the wreckage of their past. His eyes were wet, furious, relieved, and afraid all at once. "I should have protected you," he said, voice breaking on the words. "Back then. I thought I could fight them quietly. I thought if I stayed, I could keep you safe. I was wrong." Haiyan's throat tightened. The apology landed too late and still somehow cut deep. "I didn't come back for apologies," she whispered. "I know," he said. Then, softer, "but I'm asking for a chance anyway." For one dangerous heartbeat, Haiyan almost let herself lean into him. Almost let herself believe that a second life meant a second love. But her phone vibrated again, another unknown message, one line that yanked her back into cold reality. The trial was never meant to be permanent. Enjoy 27 while it lasts. Haiyan's breath caught. She looked down at her hands again, suddenly terrified not of death, but of time. If her youth was temporary, then everything, revenge, love, justice, had an expiration date. She looked up at Junessio, and the fear in her eyes must have been obvious, because his expression changed instantly. "What is it?" he demanded. Haiyan swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "This body might not stay like this," she said. "And I think Minqian built that into the plan." Junessio stared at her, rage and panic colliding. "Then we find the cure," he said, voice iron. "We find whoever designed Rewind, we tear the truth out of them, and we end this." Haiyan nodded slowly, because she had no other choice. She stepped out of the archive room into the corridor, sirens growing louder, the corporate tower trembling under the weight of its own exposed lies. And as she walked, she felt a faint, strange ache pulse behind her eyes, like a countdown beginning. If you want to see her next move, whether she chooses love, revenge, or a third path that burns them both, make sure you're subscribed, and tell me in the comments, if you woke up young again, would you fix the past, or destroy it?